In this video, we will create the following UI for our simple note application. We will learn how to use Jetpack Compose Navigation to navigate between the composable screens. We will learn how to add animation to Compose's simple column items and add swiping behavior to dismiss them. We will also learn how to customize the swipe to dismiss behavior's background when the user interacts with it. And we will use material library and icons along the way to improve our overall UI. To follow along, clone the starting code from GitHub and open it in Android Studio. Link in the video description. Make sure to switch to the branch tree improve UI start. If you have any questions along the way, make sure to write it in the comments. Alright, let's begin. After having the project cloned on your computer and setting the right branch, open Android Studio and open the project in Android Studio. And open emulator and then try to run the project to see if everything's running correctly. Perfect. If you see this, that means the project is running correctly. Let's try adding some notes. As you can see, you can simply click on Add Notes and write something in the pop-up, and then the notes will be added, and after that you can do a long press on the note item to delete it. So this is not the best way to do this. So now what we want to do is to make this look a little bit nicer. First of all, let's make sure that we are running the latest version of Compose. Oops, we have a tiny error. Seems like Compose version 1.1.1 doesn't support our current Kotlin version, so we're gonna update that one to the latest version. Let's run the project again. Let's make sure all other dependencies are also latest version. Alright, now the project should still work the same as it used to. Alright, seems like this version of Compose wants us to make sure we are using the content padding when we are using a scaffold, so we simply have to define that and give it a name and say it as a padding of the child of our scaffold in this case. So now I want to set the top bar. So whatever you add here in the top bar will be shown at the top of the scaffold. So we probably don't want to use a normal text there. We want to use a material top bar. The ripple effect is not showing correctly on the note item. Let's have a look at the modifier. So the clickable is coming before the pointer input. That seems to be the problem, since the clickable also enables the ripple effect on the composable, but is being suppressed by the pointer input. To fix it, we simply have to move the clickable after the pointer input. Alright, the ripple effect is fixed on the items. Now it's time to fix the navigation. Let's have a quick look in the documentation for Compose Navigation. To set it up, first we have to define the dependency. I'm going to define the version inside the project level build.gradle file. And then we'll define the dependency itself under my dependencies inside the app level Gradle file. Now we have to define our Nav Controller somewhere that all of our composables can have access to it. And then each Nav Controller needs to be associated with a single Nav Host composable. And the Nav Host is a composable that links the Nav Controller with the navigation graph. So it looks like this, as you can see inside the sample. You can define your Nav Host composable, and inside it you can define composables. And inside the Lambda, you can use your composable functions. Alright, let's create the nav host inside our main activity. Since our app is very small, we're just going to use the main activity for that. Inside set content, we're going to create a Nav Controller. And then under surface, we're going to create a Nav Host. Passing the Nav Controller. We're going to also need to define a start destination. That's the name of the composable that has to be the default composable. So every time we open the screen, that composable will be opened as the default. So I'm going to define two composables here. The first one is called home, and I'm also going to define it as the start destination. So simply I name it home, and I will write home as the start destination. In order to keep track of the screens and the name of the screens, I'm going to create a new enum class and call it screen. And inside the screen class, I'm going to define home and note. Home is the home screen where all the notes are being shown in a list. And the notice screen is a screen that allows the user to either write a new note or edit an existing note, which we will create soon. Now that we have the screen enum, we can simply use the enum names for our destinations and the route of our composables. Now let's define our second composable. So we're simply going to use the enum.name for the route. And inside that, for now, we're going to simply create a scaffold under this composable. Just to test things out, after that, we're going to move this scaffold inside another file. So I simply add a text composable inside the scaffold. And I'm going to also pass the content padding to the text object. This is just for testing for now. We only want to see if the navigation is working correctly. As you can see, the notice screen wasn't shown. Instead, we saw the pop-up. So let's change that. We are going to define unclick notes here. We want to pass a function there. And we're going to say this function gets a note entity. And whenever the note is clicked, we're going to call that method with the note object. Let's also quickly update it in our previews. Going back to our main activity, we're going to define that unclick note. And then we will use our Nav Controller to navigate to the notice screen whenever the note is clicked. So I'm simply calling Nav Controller.navigate with the name of the note enum, which is basically the name of the notice screen. Perfect. Now, whenever we click on a note object, we are being navigated to the notice screen. Next is to edit the notice screen to show the real note. So whenever we click on a note, we want to know which note was selected so we can show that note inside the notice screen. To do that, I'm going to add a new variable inside the home view model in order to keep the selected note. So I'm going to define that as a state with the type of note entity. Let's implement the member inside the view model itself. And since the selected note state is immutable, we cannot update its value from outside. We also only want the view model to update that variable. To achieve that, we will create a new private variable named _selected note state, but this time it will be a mutable state. So I'm going to set its default value to null. It's also why I need to define it as a nullable note entity. We then simply have to return that object as a selected note state. This way we can change the value of our state only within the view model, but restrict it from outside. We will then define another method to update the value of the state from outside of the view model. So I'm going to add a new method, call it select node, in order to set the private selected node state to the clicked state. And whenever the node is clicked, I'm going to call the vModel method and select that node. Inside my previews, I just need to fix the mocked view model in order to make the preview work, because we added a method and a new variable to its abstract. And whenever the node screen is being opened, I need to access the node object inside the home view model and set the value of the text to the value of the selected node's text. And if the text was null, I'm simply pass empty as a string to it. Alright, I just want to have that inside my scaffold because I will move all of these inside a new file. So I'm going to go under UI package, and under home I'm going to create a new Kotlin file. Let's call this one node screen. Let's define this as a composable, and we'll again call it node screen, and we're simply pasting the scaffold in there. Seems like this way of using a scaffold inside the current version of Compose is still experimental, so I'm just gonna annotate it with opt-in. It might not be the case for you. And then I'm gonna pass in the view model object. I make sure to use the abstract as the type of the view model that I'm passing in, so I can create a fake view model inside my tests and pass it to this composable later on. Now going back to our main activity, I'm just going to define the node screen under the second composable and pass in the home view model to it. I'm going to run the project to see how it looks like. So now when I click on the node object on the screen, I'm going to go to the node screen with the text value of that node in a text view. Now what we want to do is to be able to edit that text. So we need to be able to use the basic text field. We're just going to copy the same code that we had for the basic text field inside our pop-up, and we will move it inside the node screen. I'm just going to pass in the content padding into our column. Let's remove the rounded corner shape. After reading the text state from our view model, I want to make sure that this text does not reset whenever the configuration changes. For example, whenever the user rotates the screen. So I will wrap it with remember saveable. I also want this text field to fill width and height of the screen. So I'm just going to add them to my modifier for the text field. I'm just going to move this save button at the top of the screen. Well, later on I want to move this button inside the top bar as a material top bar. But right now I'm just going to move this at the top of the screen to make sure everything is working first. And whenever the user clicks on that button, I want to call the vModel method to update the node inside the database. But I also have to make sure that the node object is not null because we define it as nullable, so I'm just going to add that check to it before calling the vModel method. We will use this screen for both editing a current node and also for adding a new node. Simply by checking the room ID, we can tell if the user is editing a current node or is adding a new node. That way we can decide if we need to update the node or add a new one in the database. Alright, let's go up there and quickly clean up our imports. Let's go back to our main activity and define the onClick close. So whenever the user wants to close the screen, we want to tell the Nav Controller to pop up the backstack, so that way we know that the notice screen is on top of the backstack in this state. So whenever the user clicks on close, we simply pop it up and the user goes back to the home screen. Alright, next we want to move this button bar inside the top bar of our scaffold, but we also want to use the standard material top app bar for it. So I'm gonna start typing top app bar, and it seems like that I can't find it. So I will have a quick look at the documentation to see how to use the top app bar the right way. I will also specifically look for the latest material tree top app bar. As you can see, there are different kinds of top app bar. So I want to use the center aligned top app bar. So I will go back to our project. I will use a center aligned top app bar. And I'm going to set its title to edit. And I will simply paste the old row of buttons as the actions for this top app bar. I will edit this right away. I just want to make sure that everything is working correctly so far. Alright, so I see the edit there and I see the buttons as the actions, but they are too big to be placed as the top bar actions. So what we need to here is to first distinct the action button and the navigation button. So we're gonna first move the back button to the navigation, and now the buttons are being shown in the right places. But now we also have to change the normal buttons to icon buttons. So I'm just going to use the arrow back icon and we'll set its content description to the same button text that we had earlier. Alright, let's remove the button now. Alright, let's see how it looks like. So now we have an arrow back button that we can click on it and go back to the home screen. Let's do the same thing for the action button now. So we simply create a new icon button for the action, and we will use the same onclick that we had. And then we add a done icon, and then we will set its content description to the text of the previous button, and we will delete the button. Alright, it looks much more like a top bar now. If you remember, we checked for the room ID inside our Composable, and then we called the viewModel method. Instead of that, we're going to create a new add or update method inside our viewModel to make that decision. And inside the viewModel, we will check if the room ID is null, we will insert the note, and if it's not null, we will update it. Let's call this one add or update node. Alright, now let's quickly run the project and see if adding nodes work fine. Now, as you can see, whenever we click on the done button, the node seems to be saved, but the screen is not being closed. So let's fix that by calling onClickClose whenever the user adds the nodes. Let's see if it's fixed now. So whenever the user clicks on the done button, the note is closed, but it seems like the note is not being saved. Let's fix that too. So whenever the user clicks on the done button, we have to make a copy of our current note object and update its text value with the new text. Also, we have to move the text state to top of the scaffold so it's accessible by the copy. And then we'll use that value to create a copy of the note object and update its text to the value of the text state, and then use that to add or update a note inside our database. So let's have a look. Seems like it's working fine. Now that we are adding the text and pressing the done button, the state of the text is remaining there. One last thing to fix is to remove this pop-up, because right now this pop-up is working as it used to, so we can just like add text there, but we don't want the pop-up to be used by the user to add text. We want them to use the new note screen not only to edit their notes, but also add new notes. So let's go to our note pop-up. Let's see where it's being used. It's being only used inside home screen. Let's add a new function calling it onClick add note. And whenever the button is clicked, we're gonna call that function in order to allow the user to add notes. We're gonna update our preview. And back into our main activity, we're gonna use that function to navigate to the notes screen. Let's see how it works. So now clicking on Add Note brings us to the Edit Notes screen, but there is one issue, and that's whenever I click on Add Note, I see the note from the previous note that was being opened. That means the view model is still keeping the note that I was editing before, and it's not being deleted whenever I want to add a new note. Let's quickly fix that by adding a new reset node method in our view model. Let's close all these extra tabs. Let's also quickly delete the note pop-up because we're not going to need that. We'll also remove the pop-up state from the home screen, so we'll not need this condition anymore. Also remove the pop-up state enum. Alright, we also did our cleanup. Now let's run the project and quickly check if everything is working fine. We open a node and then we'll click on Add Node. We'll still see the node, which we're going to fix. And also, whenever we click on Add Node and write something, it's not saved. So we also have to fix that first. Let's have a look at our view models add or update node method. As you can see, if the room ID is null, then the new node is being inserted. But if we look at the node screen's done button, it's not doing anything when the node is null. So we have to tell when the node is null, create a new node entity object with room ID set to null and pass it to add or update node method. The room ID is set to null by default in our entity, so we only set the text. Let's quickly have a look at what we did on the emulator. So we'll click on Add Node, we write some note, and then we'll click on the Done button. And the note is added. Let's open the note, update it, and it's being updated. It's working correctly. We still have one tiny problem to fix. If we open a note and then close it and then adding a note, we will see the previously opened note inside our text field. We already decided on how to fix this. In our main activity, right before opening the notice screen for creating a new note, we also want to reset the notice state inside our view model. So we will need a method called something similar to reset selected note. Inside our view model, we'll simply set the notice state to null whenever that method is called. Now let's quickly go again to our previews and update the implementation of the view model. Let's see how it's working now. Perfect. Now, when we open Add Notice screen, it's clear. Let's fix this warning. Let's clean the imports. Alright, everything looks fine so far. To organize things a little bit, I'm gonna create a new package calling it Note, and I will move everything related to the Note and Note screen inside that package. Let's update the package address. Let's check if everything else is fine in this file. I'm just gonna suppress this warning. Alright, let's create a new file and call it note list item. Let's create our list item composable here. We want to make this list item to be swipeable so we can swipe to delete. So we will add an onDelete method to it. Let's also define a default modifier. So we want to use this item inside our lazy list. Then I'm gonna type the name of the composable. We're gonna move the code for onLongPress to the onDelete callback. And for clickable to the onClick callback. Let's format this code. Now we will move this code for the list item to the list item composable. Move the whole box. We're going to pass the modifier to the box. And when the box is clicked, we're simply call the onClick method, which is passed to this composable. Alright, so far everything should work the same as it used to. Next, we want to add swipe to dismiss behavior to our list items. To do that, we need to simply wrap our list item with swipe to dismiss composable. So let's start typing swipe to dismiss. It appears that it doesn't exist. That's because we have to add the default material library for Compose to have access to it. So let's quickly go to our module level build.gradle file to add it. Perfect. Now, when we start typing swipe to dismiss, we will see that it's recognized and we can start using it. For using swipe to dismiss composable, we will need to provide the dismiss state. So let's add it to our composable method signature. Let's also move everything under the swipe to dismiss. I'm going to also add this state to our note list items signature, so I can keep track of the state from outside of this composable. Just going to annotate it with experimental material API. So we're going to use remember dismiss state. Now there's also some callbacks. When the state change is happened, when it's either dismissing to start or dismissing to the end, that means the user has either swiped the list item to the end or start of the screen. So basically at this point we want to delete that node which is swiped. So at this point we want to call the delete node method of our view model, passing in the node object. Alright, seems like it's working fine. Let's try to delete a bit more. Oops, seems like sometimes more than one node object is being deleted. However, if we close the app and open it again, we see that only the correct node was deleted. This means that this issue only happens visually. This usually happens when we haven't defined keys for our lazy columns. Keys tell the lazy column how to distinguish between each object on the list. Therefore, they need to be unique for each object. We know that our node entity's room ID is unique for each item. So we can use that parameter as the key. So we're gonna change this other method called items that takes a list and gets the key. So far is everything unchanged. But now we can also add the key to this. Let's test the swipe now. Perfect. Now this is working correctly. Now that we fixed this, let's also add some basic animations to our list. So whenever we delete an item, we want this item to be animated and show some basic transition. We can simply do this by animate item placement on the modifier of the list items. Since this is also still experimental in Compose, let's also opt in for the experimental foundations API. Let's also tell Compose to animate the button. Now that we run the project, we still see that the button is not being animated. That's because we still haven't defined a key for the button. We can simply add a key to the item definition inside the lazy column for the button. Now that the button also has the key, you can see that it starts moving around the screen more softly instead of appearing in a sudden move. Now, to make the swipe action more clear to the user, let's add a red color behind the item, which becomes visible as the user starts to swipe. We also want to add an icon to tell the user more clearly what the result of the swipe would be and what they can expect after they do the swipe. So let's go to our note list item. And for the background of our swipe to dismiss, we can define its behavior and the colors and the icons and everything that should appear in this background. So first of all, we need to know the direction. So we're going to read the direction to know if the user is swiping to end of the screen or start of the screen. And then for the background color, we want an animated color. We can use animated color as a state of Jetpack Compose, which makes it much easier to animate between different colors. And then we're going to say the default state, the default color would be gray, and the end color would be red. So it doesn't make a difference to us if the user is dismissing to end or to start. Both cases, the second state color would be red. Now let's create a box that fills in the background and also has the background color that we just defined. Now as you can see, whenever we swipe this item, we will see the color, but it doesn't seem like what we want. That's because each of our items do not have a background by themselves. So they are transparent and we will directly see the background color of the swipe as the color of the item itself. So we can simply add the background color to our items. I'm just going to use the default background color of our theme. And now it works as expected. You can see we will see the red color, which starts from gray and goes to red as the user swipes. Let's add some more items and check this out again. Perfect. Now let's add the icon to our box. We're going to use a rounded icon. And we will use the rounded delete icon for this. Now let's quickly define a new string in our string resources for the content description of this icon. We're going to call this a screen home swipe delete notes with the value of delete note. We're going to simply use that there. Alright, the icon is not appearing. Let's see what's wrong. So it seems like the icon is there, but the issue is it has the wrong alignment. So we're gonna add a new variable. We'll call this one alignment. We'll read the direction. When the direction is start to end, we're gonna want to align our icon center start, and when the direction is end to start, we want to align it center end. And we're going to pass that alignment to the modifier of our box. Now if we have a quick look to the emulator, we see that the icon is aligned correctly. Other than that, we also want to change the icon tint to match the background icon. So the default color would be red. Well, dismiss to end would then be white. So we'll have more contrast to see the icon. Also same color for dismiss to start. Let's apply the icon tint now. And we'll rerun the code. Now as you can see, the icon becomes white when the background is red. Let's make the background color light gray so the icon would be more distinguishable. Perfect. Now it looks better. We can even add some scale to our icon and also use animate float as a state to change that scale when the state is changing in order to show a tiny animated icon instead of just an icon that changes color. So we want our icon to become a little bit bigger when the background is red in order to emphasize to the user that, hey, you're really deleting this item. If you continue, this item will be gone. So we're going to check if the target value of the dismiss state is default. Then we will consider a 0.75 multiplier for the size of our icon. Otherwise, we're just going to return 1. We will simply pass that scale variable to the modifier of the icon. Let's rename it to icon scale. So now as you can see, the icon becomes a little bit bigger and animates a little bit and becomes bigger for more emphasis to the user that, hey, you're deleting this item. Let's play with these numbers a little bit. I'm just gonna tell 0.8 to 1. Let's play a little bit around and make sure everything is working fine. The last thing we want to do is to add a top bar to our home screen. So I'm going to again use a center aligned app bar, similar to what we had in the note editor screen. And I'm going to show the app name and a top bar. We can also add a tiny navigation icon, which doesn't do anything, only for visual, to simply show a note icon. I'm just going to use the material notes icon for this. But it seems like that icon is not included by default. So what I want to do here is to add the material extended library to our project so I can have all those extra icons, including the notes icon. But be careful when adding this library to your project because it will increase your app size. So if it's necessary to add it, make sure to use resource shrinking to remove the unused resources and keep your app size small. Since the purpose of this project is to show how Compose works, I will skip that in this video. Let's sync the project. Alright, now we have the extended icons added to our project. We can also see that we are able to add the notes icon. Let's build our project. And we can see the notes icon on the top left of our app bar on the home screen. Alright, the app looks much better than it used to be before. Let's add some simple padding to our icon to make it look a little bit better and more aligned to the back navigation of the edit notice screen. Let's check it out. Perfect, it looks much better. Alright, now let's also add an edit icon to our note list items. So the user knows clicking on it also allows them to edit the note. So let's put the text inside the row and at the end of the row add the icon. We're going to use the edit note icon from material design. I'm going to simply give it a content description and we will edit this later. We're going to align the row to center of start of the box. I'm going to give the text a weight of 1. This way I can extend the text to fill the width of the screen without pushing the icon out of the screen. And then I will also give some padding to the end of the icon so it doesn't stick to the end of the screen. And I'm going to always make sure that the text is always staying at the center of the row. And let's also add some alpha to the icon. Perfect! In this video, we learned how to use Compose Navigation to navigate between the screens, how to add simple animations to Compose's lazy column items, and add swipe to dismiss them. We learned how to customize the swipe to dismiss background when the user interacts with it. And we used Material Library to improve our overall UI while keeping things simple. You've done a great job following along so far. Make sure to give yourself a pat on the back and take some rest to reward yourself with this achievement. If you have any questions, make sure to write them down in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that this time watching the video has been useful to you, and I am grateful for your commitment and hope to see you again learning with me.